Cole, you're holding up a book. What forever? Why would you be doing that?
Shine on, Ian. Shine on.
I've got a different version of that book. I don't know what
Oh, there you
edition
go.
you've got, and this has the excerpt from the sequel, Doctor Sleep. Does yours say the same
This
thing?
with an X from the sequel, Doctor Sleep.
So it's weird. It looks like the same cover art, except a different font on the title and the author name. What is going on here?
Some mysterious shenanigans, I think, are afoot.
I don't like it. Did you happen to get your copy from a mysterious hotel in Colorado?
Yeah, they have a little gift shop there. Felt kind of weird though. Like I was hearing some like random voices, nobody else around. Very odd.
Yeah, but that's par for the course with you because you're just flat out crazy. But we are here to talk about not only the book The Shining, but also wait, I'm gonna be freaked out if you actually have this too. The Blu-ray of The Shining or just the film. So we're doing a
Oh,
page
get
to
ready to be
screen.
freaked out.
No.
I'm just kidding. I don't have it.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say you don't even have physical media. That would be the strangest aside from like vinyl, right?
Words
But
just don't go together in my brain.
yeah, I get it. So Page to Screen, the last one of 2020. We've got a special guest, Ms. Erin Rush, or should I
This
say
is
Mrs.?
Aaron
Yes,
Rush.
I was trying to do like the formal like thing. I don't know. I can't get it straight. But
It
okay,
is Mrs. now.
yes. Um, but yeah, welcome, and I'm very excited that you're both here to talk about this book and this film. Uh, I feel like this conversation is going to go to some strange places and possibly get my credentials as a film critic removed because after finally having read the novel The Shining, I can't watch the film in the same way. And I had the same problem with Doctor Sleep, which came out last year. Read the book, saw the movie, millions of light years difference in quality between the two. And even though I'm a big fan of Stanley Kubrick, we've talked about Kubrick on this show. I can't help but watching this thinking, this is like a horror movie Cliff's Notes version of Stephen King's novel that completely misses the point. Am I way off base here?
I don't know that you're way off base. I think if the baseball diamond is where I am, I think you're just like a few feet from the base. Like could still get an out is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Um, so I think that I slightly agree with you. After reading the book and rewatching the movie, this is only my second time seeing it. I once before I read it and once after. Um, I think that the movie to me reads like an abridged version of the book, but leans into elements that the book chose not to focus on. And I don't think that it's necessarily bad choices. And there are actually some things that I'm sure we'll mention later that are better about the movie. There are a few very specific things that I like about the movie better. Um, so yeah, like Space Odyssey, I read the Shining book and movie as kind of two entities that contribute to one cohesive whole in a very odd way. They both have their merits, and I love them both for different reasons.
Cool. Erin, what's your history of The Shining? Did you grow up?
I'd seen the movie. Can you hear me or no?
Oh yeah, there was it was it was like you were I heard you talking and then I saw your mouth moving. So yeah. Right.
Weird. Well, yeah, I had seen the movie many, many times. I've been a big fan of the movie for a long time, and I hadn't read the book until this year. And having read the book, it actually made me appreciate the movie even more, if that makes
Okay.
sense. And I
Yeah.
felt it similarly to Cole. I think they're just kind of different things, but having the back story and more details from the book, I just like get the movie more. So I feel like I'd seen the movie 20 times and still had questions. And I'm like, I don't necessarily get it. And then having read the book, seen the movie, I'm like, this all makes sense, which
Mm-hmm.
is maybe why the movie doesn't stand alone on its own as well.
Yeah, it's a puzzlement because after having because I finished the book I think like a day or two before I watched the movie. And watching the film, I was looking at the choices that they made. It's not even so much a matter of omission in some cases. It's a matter of changing some of the key elements of the backstory. Like in the novel, Jack Torrance he and his family have basically been tossed out of Vermont. They have to go to Colorado to take this job as the winter caretakers of a haunted hotel. Jack got kicked out of the school he was teaching because he assaulted a student when he was an alcoholic. Before that, he had actually broken his son's arm. In the film, it's there's not so much that sense that they'd left Vermont, but it wasn't because they'd sort of been run down and they were desperate. It was just kind of like, oh, I'm taking a writing sabbatical. I was a teacher and I want to try this new thing. And
it's very ambiguous.
Right. And with his son, he had dislocated the kid's shoulder, but you get the sense that it was, the movie wants to treat it as you said, Cole, ambiguous, because the social worker, I guess she's a doctor or somebody who came to look at Danny after he had one of his fits. She was listening to Wendy tell the story about the dislocated shoulder, and you see this look of horror on her face because the denial that's on Wendy's face is just priceless. But you don't necessarily get the feeling that there is a crazy history of abuse and problems in this family from the film version. I think it's a criticism of the movie that holds up. It's easier to get a sense from the novel that Jack Torrance is a troubled, frustrated, middle-aged guy who falls under the spell of this hotel and goes crazy. In the movie, Jack Nicholson is just Jack Nicholson. So from frame one, he's already crazy. So where can he go except for like the most obvious drooling and laughing and, screaming and howling. I know they did remake this movie as a TV miniseries back in 1997. I haven't watched it, but I watched some clips on YouTube, which convinced me I never need to watch it because it's all like flannel shirts running around a hotel and bad CGI ghosts. But I'm kind of waiting for someone to really adapt this book. And it's unfortunate because I think if anyone could have just done a literal translation of the source material, it would have been Stanley Kubrick. No criticisms of the direction of the movie. I just had criticisms with the direction of the story.
It's funny because the movie Kubrick made very many choices, and it's like I said, some of them worked and some of them didn't. And you mentioned like Jack kind of starts off as crazy in the movie, which I completely agree with you. Just look at him once and you're like, oh shit, this guy is nuts. And Erin and I we were giggling the whole time because now we're part of the secret club. We both read the book and we both kind of knew like what was up. And we're watching it and looking at each other, just giggling every time Jack Nicholson comes on screen. And it was in the best possible way. We weren't saying he was bad or anything. It was just like, he is invoking this visceral response in us. But it's funny that you say that descent to craziness, it kind of starts at like he's already there in the movie. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I wrote in my review of the book is there was a point, and I think it was maybe like 300-400 pages in, where I said to myself out loud, oh shit, Jack is crazy. And I started to wonder, oh shit, am I crazy for not realizing that he was crazy from the very beginning? And the book kind of makes you question your own reading of it, in that like, what did I miss? Because it doesn't feel like it has changed, but these characters are so gradual over time in the book that payoff when you actually realize what's going on is just massive. And the movie is all payoff, in my opinion. It's hours of payoff.
I was going to hop in, having seen the movie so many prior to reading the book, I picked up that Jack was crazy kind of from the beginning, when other readers who haven't seen the movie or aren't as familiar maybe didn't. And there was a line in there where the caretaker of the hotel, I forget his name, he is saying he knew the last guy was crazy because he smiled much. And the entire description throughout that first interaction in the book is about how Jack keeps smiling and smiling. And it's just like, I read those lines and I'm like, how do people not know he's going to go insane in the book when this guy's like, the last guy was crazy because he smiled all the time. And then the next line says, Jack was smiling a giant grin. It was something like that, blatant to me. But
well, it's interesting you picked up on that, because I didn't read that as I do remember that line, and it struck me as kind of odd, but I didn't pick up on the idea of Jack being crazy in the interview because he was smiling so much. That to me was his performance of smiling in order to get the job, because his whole thought chain during that interview is how much he hates Ullman. He calls him like an officious little prick. Another translative concern I had from the book to the film is that Ullman is just presented as, a nice kind of genial manager who, he has to tell Jack in full disclosure this dirty little secret that happened in the hotel. But even Watson, the guy next to him, they're sitting together, all three of them, in the interview process. The description you get from Watson of reading the book is this cantankerous, old, grimy hotel caretaker who's constantly like blowing his nose into his handkerchief and looking at it to see if he came up, jackpots. It's all just kind of off. And I was really taken by the end of the novel when it becomes clear that at some point Jack Torrance, and it's not spelled out for the reader, but at some point Jack Torrance gets completely swallowed up by this thing that is has begun wearing his skin. Now you could read that as a metaphor, but towards the very end, it becomes, it's beyond metaphor because he's smashing himself in the face with the roque mallet and this shape-shifting thing is underneath. I don't know if you could have pulled that off in 1980, but just watching Jack Nicholson kind of go crazy without that extra demonic element, I really missed that when I watched the movie. I'm like, this would have been so much cooler if, one of the things I'm kind of rambling here because there's so much to talk about, but one of the criticisms I've heard of the film is that late in the movie when Nicholson is trapped in the pantry under that deadbolt, and he's talking to the ghosts, and the ghosts open up the bolt. That is the first indication that there actually are ghosts in the hotel for real, and that it may just not be psychotic episodes on Jack's part, Wendy's part, and Danny's part. They might all be a little bit disturbed and are seeing things, but when the ghosts let him out, it's like, okay, this place is really haunted. The book, just from the get-go, there's no question. There is some supernatural stuff going on, and I like that King committed in a way that Kubrick didn't.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I mentioned that to Cole when we were watching the movie. That thing you see in the movie feels like a vision or a hallucination, and you don't ever really believe that that's real, like you said. Whereas in the book, there are moments where they come out in the hall and all three of them see balloons and party, stuff, so they know that it actually had happened physically there. And I was saying I missed that in the movie because in the book it was so haunting because it felt like it was truly like a haunted. Whereas in the movie, is this all in their mind or is this real? And there's not a really great line between.
Yeah. And another thing that I picked up on, I haven't read a whole lot of Stephen King, but I've been reading a lot more in recent years. Some kind of King tropes that, Cole, you might have picked up on from our read of Pet Sematary. The idea of a family who is isolated and there's sort of a psychic outreach to someone, an outsider, to come in and help, and their kind of fraught journey. I'm thinking of Pet Sematary, and then in The Shining with Dick Halloran. That's not necessarily a criticism, but it seems like King has, over the course of a few stories in this decade, the 70s and 80s, was playing with a particular story archetype, but putting different skins on it. This idea of kind of like Gage in Pet Sematary, there is a little boy, but then this thing takes it over. He refers to Nicholson's character at some points as it went down into the basement to check on the boiler, kind of calling to mind Stephen King's It. Some really cool ideas here that, again, it's a bit much to ask to go back in time and have Kubrick, translate something that I'm thinking of in a modern meta context. But as a modern viewer, it's like, I almost wish that I had never read the novel so I could just stay appreciative of what Kubrick did. But knowing that Stephen King hates the movie and having heard that for decades, I finally understand why. I think I'm firmly in his corner, which is, again, weird to say because now I can no longer look at this as a Kubrick masterpiece. It's a masterpiece-ish if you don't know what it could have been.
Yeah, there's one key difference for me between the book and the movie that I'm really stuck on. And I think it's that in the book, the Overlook itself is more or less a character. It is a existing entity, very clearly has an influence, and you're kind of discovering what the aspects of this character are as you kind of read through the book, right? Mm-hmm. And in the movie, based on that kind of nebulous, I'm wondering if it's really psychosis or actually the Overlook. You don't get that feel that the Overlook is this imposing character presence. You get that it's a scary place, right?
Yeah.
But scary place is one thing, and complete fleshed out character that you learn about is something completely different. And The Shining book is amazing at character. I believe I called it a masterpiece of character in my review. And that this is a surprise to no one. It's Stephen King, right? That is what makes The Shining so great, is because you feel like these people are real. You believe them as people who exist in the world that is created. And that's why you're so invested in seeing where their journey ends up. In the movie, because you have such truncated time compared to a 700-page book, you have to ramp up the moments. So it's like, even by scene 3, Jack is just saying crazy shit, being really angry with Wendy. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you have to do that for character development. You kind of have to be over the top to even be at any baseline level. And that's what I really appreciated about the book, is just, I'm reading it and I'm like, I'm as interested in the inner workings of the Overlook as I am in these characters. And the movie kind of asks you to put all your chips in for the characters, while the Overlook is the dealer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I don't know, I haven't read up much on the history of the movie, although there is a great documentary. I don't know if I've ever talked to you guys about this, called Room 237. It came about 7 years ago, and it's a documentary about conspiracy theories related to The Shining, the film. It's a fantastic piece that puts forth some really bonkers opinions from people who have way too much time on their hands. But at the end of it, you're going to be sitting there wondering if at least 70% of them aren't, they sound crazy, but they make a damn good case. But one of the things, that's a roundabout way of saying, I don't know anything about deleted scenes or stuff that they had meant to shoot but didn't. But the scrapbook is such a big part of the novel, the one that Jack finds in the basement with all the, the old receipts and bills. It shows up in the film. Did you guys catch that? It's sitting on his writing desk next to his typewriter. It's more like a gray kind of scrapbook. And I think the first scene where he and Wendy get into an argument, it's actually open and you see some newspaper clippings. I think later on you see it closed. It's not white and kind of like gold gilted like it is in the book, but it's definitely there. And Torrance, I keep calling him Nicholson because he's just Jack Nicholson in this movie. But in the scene where Jack Torrance meets Delbert Grady, the former caretaker who killed his family, in the bathroom, they're talking to each other. He says, "Grady, I was reading about you in the papers," which is a direct reference to that scrapbook, because all he heard from Ullman in the interview was, yeah, this guy went crazy and killed his family. So it just feels like there's stuff that either they wrote that into the script as an allusion back to the book, or maybe they filmed something or something got excised regarding that scrapbook, which I think would have been really important to showing what you were talking about, Cole, developing the Overlook as a character full of all these ghosts crossing generations.
Yeah, I think I cut Coop a little more slack than you guys do on this one.
That's
simply
fair.
Because number one, I've always been a fan of the movie, but having read the book and having to consider all of the possible things they could have included, and what he chose to and what he chose to omit, I am happy with the choices, and I kind of understand that backstory you can't necessarily fit in. And for me, it's so hard to, in that amount of time, show Jack Nicholson's character just like going crazy. I think he kind of had to be an all-in from the beginning. But
one of the things I think that they could have done in the movie from the book is there are scenes where Danny is on the tour of the hotel with the family, and he sees these images of things that have happened. And then Jack finds those very news clippings later about like a mafia murder residential suite, and that's an easy ad for me to just say like, okay, some fucked up shit happened in this hotel and Danny knows about it. But I completely get what Erin's saying there. There's only so much that you can shunt in, but I'm going to use that. I'm going to take that, put it through my brain filter, bring it out the other side of what I think the movie did, that I wish the book had included. Okay. And Erin and I talked about this after our viewing. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Yes.
Holy shit. Stanley Kubrick is a genius. I can say
we all want to jump in, but
right, I can say all the terrible things about this movie, even though it's a really good movie and I really like to watch it. Like I can say, oh, it didn't adapt this, didn't adapt this. That edition is probably the single best not from the book edition in an adaptation that I have ever seen.
Yeah,
I just love it.
Yeah, I mentioned that too. And the reason I think it works so well is it was Stanley Kubrick's way of saying, how are we going to make him being a writer and what he's writing about fit in? Because we're not telling the audience anything about the scrapbook. We're not telling them anything about the history of the hotel. So what's going to happen with Jack's writing? Like, what is he writing about? And he's like, nothing. That's the craziest thing that we could possibly do for this crazy character. And just Wendy picking up the pages for like 10 minutes and you're like, do you get it yet? He's insane. I agree with Cole. I think it's phenomenal.
It takes Wendy like 50 pages to realize he's insane, which is funny enough.
She's like, maybe this is just like the first 50 pages. And then
he's like,
really
okay, first chapter is good.
But yeah, I think that's a perfect example of he needed to change up from the book because he didn't have the time to put in all of this character development and all of these stories and everything about the Overlook Hotel that we needed to know to get to that point. So I think that was an awesome choice. If we're talking about what I missed from the book in the movie, a huge part of it is just Danny. In general, the book does such a good job of explaining right off the bat kind of what The Shining is and what it means to shine and everything. In the movie, I feel like you don't even know anything. I barely knew that he could read minds. I barely knew that he could, hear what his parents were saying through walls. None of that I got in the movie. I was just like, not really sure. In the book, it was great to read it. And like I said, that just further enhanced the movie, because when you know the book, you kind of get it from the movie, but without the book, you just have no idea, in my opinion.
Couple of things. Yes, the pages. I just want to go back to the pages really quickly. Something that I hadn't picked up on until watching this, and I love the detail, but I also don't like what it represents. If you listen to, there's a couple of tracking shots of coming into the room as Jack is typing out his pages, way before you even see what he's writing. If you pay attention to the rhythm and the amount of times that he hits return, it's clear from the outset, the first time we see him writing, that he's writing all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. That is a great detail that I love. What I hate about it is that it indicates that when he sat down to start writing his book, he was already crazy. Like he was already there. I also love that when Wendy picks up the pages, it's clear that it's not just Xeroxed versions of the same thing. It's some poor intern or PA had to sit there and type all this out and get really creative with it, because there's misspellings, there's all different sorts of like formatting, craziness. Yeah, it's really inventive. As far as Danny, yeah, I agree. I think the book plays with Tony a lot more, which is the imaginary. He's like the essence. We find out who and what Tony is more so in Dr. Sleep. I think it's kind of alluded to it towards the end of the book, but in the movie they just make Tony, quote unquote, the little boy who lives in my mouth, which just makes me giggle every time I hear it. But yeah, he's just like Rad Rum, and he's in the screenplay turns him from this kind of a sinister force that is showing Danny these visions of horrible things to someone who's really trying to help him and guide him in a lot of capacities. And I feel like that's a nuance that you kind of do have to put in for a 2.5 hour movie. You can't really explore over several hundred pages, but I just like, damn, like everything's just so kind of cut and dry and rushed in the film version that it bugged me. Now, the one thing I did love in relation to The Shining, and it really is the closest thing we get to an explanation, is Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran. Wow. My God, this is like one of the perfect movie performances I've ever seen. I could watch an entire Dick Halloran movie. It's just every time he's on screen, there's so much. It's just the nuances of his performance. You feel like a million actors could have done this role, but not in this particular way that he did. I believed him as this character completely.
I love Scatman Carruthers. He may be my single favorite actor of all time based on this movie and this movie alone, and also the Aristocats. But I think that uh, the scene where he and Wendy and Danny are in the kitchen is probably my favorite of the entire movie, because there's that part where he calls Danny Doc. Well, golly, we don't call it. How'd you know we call him Doc, Mr. Halloran? And he goes, well, he looked like a doc, don't he? And Wendy just kind of buys that. And it's a really unique nod to the power of The Shining. Like, we don't even know if he's using The Shining to kind of make her forget about it, but it's just like Halloran's looking at me being like, I've got this, we're good. And he just kind of deflects really easily. And that buys him the trust with Danny, that he then, kind of ladders into this ice cream treat chat, if you want to call it that, which obviously is not in the book, but is represented in the book by this chat they have in the car, right?
I'm glad this is a choice that they made for the movie that I'm really glad about, because reading the book, I'm like, okay, Wendy, you're really going to let your 5-year-old kid go out into sit in a car across a parking lot with a 70-year-old man?
It was the 70s. Yeah, I think one thing I do miss from the book slightly, even though Scatman Crothers is amazing, was the connection between Halloran and Danny. I feel it in the movie, but I think the actual connection between them, where Halloran says, if you're in trouble, hit me like you just hit me in the car.
Yes.
That doesn't exist in the movie. We think he's just coming by because he cares about this cute little boy. I don't know. That's really the only thing. And he knows he has The Shining, right? So he cares that way. But that significant and strong connection that's in the book was something that I did miss in the movie. But obviously a choice that needs to be made.
One other thing to add to that. When Danny does call Halloran in the movie, via this psychic Shining connection, Halloran kind of freezes in his bed with his mouth open and is like reaching out, and he looks just like Dave Bowman did in the Alien Museum at the end of Space Odyssey. Dave Bowman has The Shining. Prove me wrong. You can't.
The main connection I made to Space Odyssey was just the choice in sound in this movie was also great. You mentioned the detail with the typing. I noticed that too. That was phenomenal. There's a lot of moments where there's no music. There's more just like hovering tones, which is very representative of like haunting to me. But the specific moment I can think of is when Danny's riding the bike through the hallways and his bike goes from like tile onto carpet onto tile. It's for some reason the creepiest noise in the entire world, but it's just made organically by that bike going over carpet, going over tile, going over
Could
carpet.
that symbolize Jack's teetering on sanity and insanity?
No, because he's crazy the whole time. There's no teetering.
Cole's crazy theory corner.
Well, I love that detail too, because a lesser filmmaker would have put some kind of a creepy, soundtrack over that, but you don't need it. Just the fact that there's nothing except the sound of the carpet and that echoing, kind of a deal. But I did write down in my notes, this movie is 70% creepy music and heartbeats. Because
lots of heartbeats.
Yeah, I'm watching certain scenes. I'm like, if this score was not here, if this audio heartbeat on the soundtrack was not here, this scene wouldn't be nearly as effective. And I understand that's sort of the point of score, but I feel like they were trying to nudge the emotions, the fear along in a way that the book didn't have to prod you. It just like made you feel, oh my God. And that's the other thing. Reading Stephen King or hearing about Stephen King growing up for the last 40 years, before I started reading his book, I had this idea of him as just a horror writer. He's a fantastic horror writer, but out of the 700 pages of the book, like maybe 100 is horror stuff, and the rest is wonderfully probing psychological details of this family falling apart due to alcoholism, due to trust, due to just parenthood. It's fantastic. And I think that's another reason I'm kind of like, well, they turned it into a horror movie, which I understand, but I don't know. I just feel like it's selling. Kubrick and company sold the novel short, but I don't know if I feel comfortable assigning blame because, again, this is the late 70s.
Yeah.
I don't think people were more ready for that now, but the fact that Dr. Sleep bombed kind of indicates that they weren't.
Yeah, I mean, would
Yeah.
people sit through a psychological thriller that's 2.5 hours long right now with only the slightest hint at supernatural elements? That's kind of my question. And it's like, I guess I wonder how viable a direct adaptation of The Shining can really be when you have so much detail that is really hard to get. And Ian, you know a million times more about movies than we do, and you can probably name 5 movies that do this successfully.
I can't because you put me on the spot.
But I'm sure you could list them at some point. But I mean, that speaks to why I enjoy both of these things as installments of the same type of story. It's nebulous and hard to explain, but I love the book and I love the movie. And I like, if I had to make a choice, of course choose the book, but I'm like I'm the page half of this Page2Screen team up, right? Like that's just, I'm gonna choose the book. It's just kind of how it is, but they're both great. And it's really hard to take element of the movie that Kubrick did and this isn't right because it's not from a book, because for a lot of it works really well. And it's like the all working, the elevator blood image is really interesting to me because that hints at more dark underneath the overlooks exterior.
Yeah, I think going back to Stephen King's writing, and it's hard to say which one I would choose because I just love the movie, such a nostalgic for me. But this was actually my first Stephen King read, the first one. I haven't read any since that, so it's the only one.
Wow.
And Ian, you have to agree with you in terms of like characterization and the way that Stephen King can just show this person going crazy through his language and writing is unbelievable to me, and it just is so good. I can't even say.
He has to be crazy, right?
Yeah, but I think going from that, it's similar to what Cole is saying, where it's super hard to adapt someone and everything going on in their mind leading to craziness in a visual media platform. You know what I mean? Because so much of it is taking place internally or flashbacks in the book, and it's just something that I think is so difficult to translate, and that's why Stanley Kubrick had to take so many liberties and say, I think we need to mix this and go with this.
And I agree with that. You're talking about this question that you're posing of, could this be done today? And I think it could, but it would take the right director, or maybe even a pair of directors with different sensibilities. There was a guy I talked to a couple months ago now named Sean Durkin, who did a film called The Nest with Jude Law and Carrie Coon. And it's about a couple with 2 kids and their marriage is gradually falling apart. And it takes place in the 80s. That is gripping psychological drama that is sort of like, shades of the same idea, not the specifics, but King is really good at bringing out things that maybe I'm just relating to this because I've got severe problems, but there are scenes from Wendy and Jack's marriage that I'm embarrassed to say I could relate to. Not the alcoholism or breaking my kid's arm, but just like squabbles they would get into and kind of like fights and things like that. I'm like, that is, that's observant. It's real. It happens. And I could very much see a malevolent force just getting its hooks into those moments and exaggerating them to make something attractive. Like, you could really get yourself out of the situation if you come play with us. But this other movie I'm talking about, The Nest, there's no supernatural elements to it, but it does get down into that kind of an idea of, you could have something that's horrifying and relatable to an audience and enrapturing. And then if you get someone who's really good at horror to add those deft little touches, not something that's kind of cartoonishly obvious, I think it could make a masterpiece. One thing that I was stunned to see reading the book is the Grady twins, the 2 little girls holding hands saying, come play with us. For decades, I've been so frightened of these 2 little girls from the movie that when I took on the novel, I'm like, I probably gonna have to flip past the Grady twins because they freak me the hell out.
Keep the lights on,
Seriously.
For sure.
But they're not they're referenced in the book when Ullman says, yeah, this guy Delbert Grady went crazy and he hacked up his 2 daughters. That's it. We do get some kinds of, an allusion to Danny possibly thinking he might see another kid in the playground who wants him to come play with him. But it's like they took these 2 disparate elements, Kubrick and the co-adaptor, who is Diane Johnson, and said, hey, let's draw these out and make something really creepy. That is an A+ decision in my book.
It's like they traded the hedge animals for the twins.
Yeah, because I just can't see them making the hedge animals work with where CGI was at the time. So that was an okay choice. Yeah,
it's just a man in a leaf costume. Ooh.
But yeah, Ian, I agree with you completely. Twins are a huge thing that has always stuck in my memory, and I was reading like, where twins? When's he going to turn the corner? And it just never happened. So I loved that choice. Yeah, so I'd have to agree with that one.
Can we talk about Lloyd? Because Lloyd is one of my favorite aspects of the movie.
Yes.
Like when Jack sits at the bar, oh man, I mean, it's just, okay, cool. He's sitting in a bar, probably going to play pretend for a while, like whatever. Everybody needs a little reprieve. And then it's just staying Mr. Torrance. And I'm like, that, I don't know who that actor is, but he was amazing. Lloyd. Holy crap. It is phenomenal. He sits there and you just like, you weirdly want to give you a drink as well, even full well knowing that when you drink it, you're going to go nuts.
Yeah, he is a great actor. The only other thing I had seen him in, he had a bit part in Blade Runner, the original, which was a couple years after this. But there is something to he doesn't move around a lot. When they cut to him, they're almost cutting back to the same reaction shot. It feels like they're using it over and over again, but he's just got that kind of a cat grin to his face where he's like, it's stoic, but there's something else going on. Like he knows he's doing his part for the hotel, but he also knows that he's anticipating Jack taking that drink and he's going to be as soothing as he can be. I like that that's just his demeanor throughout the entire thing. He doesn't turn into like some raving goblin later on. He's just a character that appears and then disappears. He's wonderful.
He reads to me in both the book and the movie as like, the Overlook has done all of the calculations. It's got its conspiracy theory board with threads and tacks and pictures. And it's like in the center of it, circled in big red thread, is Lloyd. And it's like, this is what will get Jack to come with us, right? And in a movie, I love it especially because it's like, we've gone through the situations, we've done the calculations, and this is the most likely scenario. And then Lloyd's just there like,
well, he's important too in the book, not so much the film. There is a lost thread in the translation. In the novel, Lloyd really sells this idea that the drinks are on the house because management says so, and management has an interest in him, and Jack might have potential to climb this ladder, which could mean that in the metaphysical sense he could one day become so evil that he takes over as management, or it could just be a trap to say, we want to promise you this, we're really interested in your boy, which is another detail that doesn't get really translated well.
It's so good. It's like you made me think of something because he does this. Go ahead. No. I
was going to say, at the end, when Jack is yelling at Wendy, he starts screaming stuff about management and all this stuff. Like, where is this coming from? Having read the book, I'm like, I know what he's talking about, but audience members, they don't even probably pick up on it. They're just like, oh, he's just talking crazy nonsense.
Yeah, well, in the book and the movie, reference to you've always been the caretaker, right? And of that, Grady, as part of the Overlook, knows that Jack's never going to become the manager. He's always been the caretaker. That's as high as he's ever going to climb.
Ooh.
But the Overlook is selling him on the idea that he's going to go much higher. And Jack buys into it because he's great. Of course he's going to be the manager, right? But he's always been the caretaker. He's never going to be more. I love that.
I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting interpretation I didn't consider. And I was going to ask you guys what your interpretation of that. And also, to me, it feels like Grady is almost genuine and not necessarily remembering that he murdered his whole family, because he's now so much the hotel and part of the hotel and the scheme to gather more souls for the hotel, that he genuinely doesn't necessarily remember that. But then you get the creepy little smile at the, he knows. But I think him just being so engrossed in that entity of the hotel that he actually doesn't even remember for a second that happened.
I was thinking about this as well. And, what does the hotel do with its souls, and what kind of souls can it grab? I mean, because a lot of the victims in the Overlook, in terms of the novel, you had gangsters, you had the old lady who was kind of like using younger boys for her, desires and whatever. So you get the sense that it attracts crooked people and absorbs them into its fabric. But with the Grady family, you get the idea that the one daughter had tried to burn the hotel down. Perhaps she had some shining. Perhaps she had just seen something that was like, no, I have to save my family. So when Grady, the father, kills the two little girls and then the mom, are they absorbed into the hotel, or because they were sort of pure in spirit, do they just go on to whatever nice afterlife they may have earned otherwise? Because in the film, Grady says, when Jack asks about the family, this could have been a put on, because we do find out a few minutes after that Grady really does know what's going on. But he says, I'm sure they're around here somewhere. I haven't seen them in a while. So perhaps the deal was he killed his family and then killed himself. He got stuck in this hotel, but he's just wondering, where the hell are my kids? Because they're off in another plane. They're not suffering along with him. But we also see the Grady twins. Could that be the hotel coming up with an apparition based on something that happened there, but not necessarily representing their actual souls that are trapped?
I wonder if... Go ahead, Erin.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's interesting you bring that up, because then you get the whole... In the book, obviously, the main goal is to get Danny, and they're kind of using Jack so it can get to Danny. So they have to be able to at least absorb that energy to become more powerful. I'm not exactly sure why they want Danny, but to me, Danny's not crooked, right? Danny's an innocent little boy who just happens to be like the most powerful shining boy, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a great point, because the hotel in the novel, it is more explicitly spelled out this theory of, if it were to absorb Danny, what else could it do? Because without him, it's just, they pick up on like little people with little bits of shine, but he's like the supernova that they've never quite encountered. So it might expand its reach. It might expand its ability to do things to people who come into the hotel, because it's sort of alluded to that people who don't shine aren't really bothered by the Overlook, which explains why it's able to stay open for decades, even though it kind of opens and closes because of different tragedies. Not everyone who goes in there, they're going to leave positive Yelp reviews. You're like, oh, it was great. I don't have any psychic twinkle at all. Right. Which is, it's an interesting idea.
I just wonder if the Overlook senses the power of the people who come through it. And those who are more crooked or more crazy innately are more susceptible to it. But the more power gains, the more capable the Overlook becomes of taking people to reach the level of Danny. Like, it's pretty clear that Danny is a new power level. And I haven't read Dr. Sleep book, but in the movie, there's a girl that's like Danny times 10, right? And I wonder if the Overlook, so if the Overlook, this is a weird theory and it's more based on the film, but to me, if Jack's always been the caretaker, it's like the Overlook can kind of recreate the lives of its subject, some weird, timeless loop, and use those lives that creates and agents to bring powerful beings into the world, because the hotel only wants people that shine, even, and it's able to take over the people who can shine a small amount fairly easily, because I think it's pretty implied that Jack can shine the tiniest bit. So does it then him and say, okay, we're going to create this new life outside of time and space, and then bring you to the hotel timeline to see if we can get what you create that shines brighter than you do? It's a convoluted and weird type idea, but that's the way I see it in the film. In the movie, I don't necessarily get that. I just get that the Overlook is a draw to people of this power for whatever reason. Danny is standing outside the room. He can't help himself, right? I don't really know. I want you guys to kind of pick that apart and see what you think, because currently where my standing on the film.
Yeah, I think the interesting point is that Jack died a little. Definitely know that in the movie. That's kind of clear as well. But the reason why I think maybe I'm so okay with Jack being crazy from the beginning, as soon as he maybe steps into the hotel, right? I think to me, it's more of a psychological like strength. And perhaps Danny is stronger psychologically for whatever reason. And Jack is this weak being with this weak shining. So he becomes just engrossed and part of the hotel the moment he's, and he has this ability, and maybe it's a nod towards Tony assisting with that to separate him from the hotel slightly in the movie. But to me, I read it more as Danny's just stronger as a human being than Jack, and maybe it's because of wear and tear in Jack's life that we don't get that backstory. But yeah, I thought of it more as that psychological strength as opposed to.
Is it that like sin wears people down? Is there some religious overtone to this, that like the older you get and the more opportunity you have to do bad things, the more the Overlook wants you, or the easier it is for the Overlook to overtake you, and it wants people who are free of that kind of mess, that dirtiness?
Well, you know, it's one of the theories that was put forth in that documentary that I mentioned is something that I couldn't get out of my head while watching the movie now, was that the Shining is and the Overlook Hotel represents sort of American imperialism in the context of the First Nations, the people who were essentially run roughshod over the beginning of this country. It really stuck out to me. Not only is there a lot of Native American design in the hotel, but so I think Ullman says, yeah, this place was built on top of an old Indian burial ground. The people who built this place were actually attacked. But also in Ullman's office, when you first see him, if you go back and look at the composition of him sitting behind his desk, it's all these kind of almost muted colors, but the American flag sitting proudly on top of his desk stands out like a light bulb. So yeah, there's some weird themes going on throughout this. I think that, Kubrick and Diane Johnson, if they're trying to say anything about what this hotel is doing, there is a reincarnation theme that I think is driven home kind of clumsily in that final shot where you get the push in on the party picture, the black and white picture. It's a triple close-up. You see the picture, then you see Jack Nicholson, and then you see the Jack Nicholson, the date underneath it. It's like July 4th, 1921. So is the idea that, I think if they had left the date out, it might have been implied that Jack Torrance was just absorbed into the fabric of this hotel, literally. But because they focus on the date, I get the idea that he was there in 1921. He probably died and was reincarnated as Jack Torrance and now has this son. That's why earlier on he said, when I came in here, I felt like I knew it was around every corner. So it's just sort of the easy horror movie explanation from what's going on that leaves out all of the nuance and possibilities of the novel. But I'm kind of fine with that because,
it's like the Overlook recreates these people. And maybe the Shining is inherently sinister because it is a creation of the Overlook, And it's like, I just wonder how different the movie would be if somebody came up to Jack at the very beginning of the movie and goes, "Oh, that's a bad hotel up there. Better be careful of that hotel."
That's something interesting too, because they don't really touch on this. It's been a while since I read Dr. Sleep, and that's more about psychic vampires and adult Danny's ability to deal with them. But
naturally,
we don't really get an idea of someone using the negative shine, like who's not the Overlook. We see Danny and we see Halloran, who are both good people who are using the shine to communicate. What would it be like for an evil person, a sinister individual, to use that? How would that manifest? I mean, I guess if we're saying that people who are evil or corrupt who have some shine are drawn to the Overlook, and then they're destroyed by the hotel so it can then use that energy. But we just don't really see that illustrated. We hear about it in almost these flashback stories like, oh yeah, there are gangsters and corrupt people and they all got killed horribly. But it'd be interesting to see like an Ullman character if he was evil, like trying to use his shine to manipulate things. I don't know how that would work out, but you'd almost need a second sequel.
Yeah, one really quick point I want to make there is think Halloran, different endings he has in the book versus the movie. You know, in the book, he gets off scot-free. And to me, it's because
I don't know if he gets off scot-free.
But I mean, like, he is to me, he's the hero of the book because he gets a call, quote unquote, from The Shining, from Danny, all the way in Florida from Colorado. And he goes through all the snow, everything, drives up the mountain on a snowmobile, fight head and save. So the book to me is like these people who are good and have the shining are winning out. In the film, what my theory is that the Overlook knew that Danny was going to call Halloran back. So maybe it also wanted Halloran. Jack ends up killing him right away as he walks in. And it's like, you know, maybe the Overlook realizes that Halloran has the shining, but can never, quote unquote, because it's always during the open season when everybody's around. But when Jack comes, here's an opportunity to get both me and Halloran, who are both very powerful shiners.
That's an interesting theory. It might work because that last part that you added about Halloran sort of, maybe he's a magnet for Danny via Jack. I don't know. But a lot of the other murders that had happened in the hotel happened during the open season. The Grady family was sort of an isolated, no pun intended, incident. But no, I see, I'm having a lot more fun discussing these theories than I am the actual movie.
Yeah, and I think that's but that's why I love the, because to me, I think, Cole, when we watched it, I turned and said to you, it's so like Stanley Kubrick, how at the end of Space Odyssey, everyone sits and talks about it for 2 hours because it can be whatever you kind of want it to be. You have the chance to argue your point, have the chance to feel what you think it is and what it means to you. And I think The Shining kind of does that, especially in the ending. For so long, I assumed it was a reincarnation thing. And this time, having watched it, I was just like, I think he just is absorbed into the hotel. I don't know if I buy into the reincarnation theory or not. And I think the way Kubrick leaves that and like those different potential options is very much, it's just like right in line with Space Odyssey is what I had kind of picked up, where it's like, think what you want to think. It could be right. You'll never know.
Do they exist in the same universe? Can you know, is the Overlook created same beings that left the monoliths?
No, but I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure if you had panned, if it had gone through the hotel after you see that picture out the window, you would have seen the Star Child up in the sky.
There you go.
No,
I love that.
Star
no. Cole creates obviously dumb question. Ian, answer no.
I personally enjoyed looking at Jackson's face more than the baby fetus, though. I hate the baby fetus.
It is kind of
we just say fetus.
It's the baby fetus. The star fetus. I'm star fetus.
Star fetus.
Okay,
you're going places,
that said, Erin, so I realize we're kind of wrapping up on The Shining, but we haven't had her on in probably 2 years, not that I read. And since then, she has both seen and read one of our tentpole films, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
And I quote about Erin's thoughts on the book: "Want to vomit, it is so good."
When I put it down, I was like, I feel like I need to throw up because it's just like, whoa, like hit me physically somehow. The Shining I loved a lot too. I prefer Space Odyssey, but that's a separate conversation, I guess.
And this being your first like real foray into King's books, I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I would also recommend, and maybe we'll talk about this on a show in 2 years because I think that's when the anniversary, Salem's Lot, which is it's a shorter novel about, I a town taken over by vampires. And that has a very similar thematic connection to the idea that a place can be evil and draw evil people to it. I think that's actually might be a line from the book, or at least a paraphrase. But yeah, all good stuff. So I can't remember. Cole, you said that you've watched Dr. Sleep but haven't read the book. Is that right?
That's correct.
Aaron.
Same.
Okay. Yeah.
We saw it together, and it was list fodder. Like, it wasn't. I'm not a fan by the movie. It just wasn't great.
I got major like Twilight vibes cinematically, and I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. Although Ewan McGregor is like, I could watch him do anything, to be honest. But
that's saying something, because you watched Moulin Rouge.
You liked Moulin Rouge.
Yeah, but it's not exactly, Adele.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know that we necessarily have to do a discussion on it, but I do invite the both of you to read Dr. Sleep. And then you can just tell me about it. Like, because I feel like I've talked after reading The Shining, I want to go back and reread Dr. Sleep. I don't want to go back and watch the movie because I remember it so much. But it is one of those things where if you didn't care for the movie, I think the book might be slightly upsetting, because you want to talk about the potential that was left on the adaptation floor of The Shining. It's exponentially greater with Dr. Sleep. I'm very upset by that movie still.
I remember listening to your episode about Dr. Sleep, Ian, at least until the spoilers like really came into play. And I don't remember who you were with. It might have been Fowley and one other critic. And they were like, after hearing thoughts on the book, like, man, I wish I had read it. Like, I remember you being a very staunch advocate book, which makes me all the more excited to read it. It is on my shelf right over here, and it's on my list.
Awesome. Well, I think we kind of touched on the idea of the hedge maze animals and how it's a good idea that they left those alone in 1979 when they're making this. I do like as much as I didn't like Jack Nicholson stumbling around and howling at the moon, before he collapsed, I did like the cinematography of following Danny through the maze, and it was all very, scary and creepy, and you got that tense feeling that someone is right, on top of you. So yeah, high points for that. Last thing, I don't want to be mean here, but I am not a member of the Shelley Duvall fan club, at least in terms of how Wendy is portrayed in this movie. Because if Nicholson starts out crazy, she is like, aside from that first scene with the doctor or whatever, she's just like hysterical the entire movie. And not just like, I think I'm going crazy. She's like a Muppet, just like flailing around and screeching.
When she runs up the stairs like this.
She's floating inflatable balloon man that you see outside of a used car shop.
Yeah, it's the running up the stairs is the part that I just can't. But I mean, I think the casting, if you want to cast a creepy female for the great job. Also, I was okay with her being brunette in the movie and blonde, because I think brunettes are it's a little bit darker. But yeah, a lot of now comical. I think her performance.
I have a Wendy is portrayed in the movie, and I think a capable actress given a raw deal, because, and this is not leading into a joke. I just genuinely wish they gave her more, because she's kind of just a nothing. Jack goes crazy right in front of her at the typewriter and is like, I need to fucking wait. And she's like, oh, okay, Jack. And then just walks away. Like, I know that the Wendy in the book would stand up for herself, because she does many times. And in the movie, she does not at all. And I hate that. She plays second fiddle to Jack Nicholson, which is a travesty.
Yeah, I agree. Great. I think that's it's a casualty of the runtime, I would imagine. And also this something that really stuck out to me is the phrase horror movie ending of the way the film kind of winds down, when the famous scene where Nicholson is busting through the door with an axe and here's Johnny and all that stuff. Wendy has just gotten Danny out the window. He's sliding down the snowdrift to safety. When she finally gets out, She goes outside, goes back, or no, she goes back into the hotel and starts going upstairs to look for Danny in their upstairs apartment. It makes sense in the novel because she thinks that he's upstairs hiding under his bed, but she just watched him go down the snowdrift. The only reason she goes back into the hotel and goes upstairs is so that she can encounter all these ghostly images, like the skeletons in the ballroom and the guy saying, "It's a great party, isn't it?" I'm like, this is not a smart move. Am I wrong here?
No.
No, I didn't. I actually didn't notice that in continuity. But no, you're right.
I think Wendy, like I said, she gets a raw deal in the movie, and it's really disappointing because I think that she's one of I love her in the book. I love all the characters in the book. I think that they're all done really well in the movie, with the exception of Wendy, and I think it's a damn shame.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it here, gang. Thank you very much for talking about The Shining for Page2Screen, the last of 2020. We'll have to figure out our watching list for 2021. I can only imagine what that's going to be. But yes, this has been a fun conversation. Read Dr. Sleep. We'll talk more about it another time. But yeah, well, I should not be so rude. Any final thoughts on The Shining?
I would like to say that I gave The Shining, it is tied for my highest score ever given to a book on The Quill to Live. The only one that I gave a same score is Dune, which we should probably talk about next year anyway, a Page2Screen possibly. But
yes,
adore the book. I love Stephen King. And watching the movie, I think that despite all the errors we found, we kind of came around to it in this discussion, and we definitely found some things to love for people who are looking for an adaptation that is slightly tweaked.
yes.
I have nothing really bad to say about either one.
Cool.
Yeah, I think mine is kind of what I said at the beginning. Love them both for their own thing. The movie was a movie I saw because my dad told me I had to watch it, and he does this a lot, and I think I'm gonna hate it every time I love it. And this was one of those movies. So since I think I saw it in high school for the first time, I've just always loved it. Think it's awesome, fun to watch, enjoy it every time. The book, I'm so happy it was my first Stephen King book because it was great. And I knew it would be my first one because I do love the movie. But I definitely am going to read Dr. Sleep.
Awesome. Well, I definitely have come around on this. I will probably I'll wait a few years before I watch the Shining film again, because I have to get the book out of my head, because I'm going to be doing that comparison thing. But it's not one of those deals where now that I've read the book, I never want to see the film again, because there are parts that I really do appreciate. And I appreciate you guys talking me through this, because I wasn't sure I was going to go. But yeah. All right. Thank you very much. And until then, next time, whenever that is.
Wherever that is.
Yes, the Overlook is officially closed.